On this edition of the CEO Advantage podcast, we have Adelaide 36ers basketball team owner Grant Kelley, successful businessman who's worked overseas for 30 years, come back to South Australia and helped create Australia's best basketball club. You won't want to miss it. Welcome back to the CEO Advantage podcast. You may have noticed there's been a little break, but that's because I've been away. I'm really excited today to introduce a friend of mine, Grant Kelley. As a South Australian, you may know Grant as the owner of our favourite basketball team, but there's so much more to the Grant Kelley story, and we're going to find it out today. Welcome, Grant.
Thanks, Paul.
I ask every person on this podcast the same question to kick off. So let's ask you the same one. What was the first job you got paid for?
The very first job was at university working for my father, who had a business at Port Adelaide cleaning ships. So I was literally, in overalls taking the waste from ships to disposal sites in a 5-ton truck and disposing of it. Pretty inauspicious role for a law student, but it taught me the honour of manual labour and how good the average Australian worker is.
Yeah. That's got to be one of the toughest ones.
It was pretty tough, especially with my old man, who was not an easy boss, God rest his soul.
Yeah. So your dad ran his own business. He was self-employed.
Yeah, he was a financier for many years, and then in the early 80s, bought this ship cleaning business at Port Adelaide and moved from having been CEO of mercantile credits for South Australia and Western Australia to actually running this business in his early 50s.
Yeah.
And did very well out of it, and made great friends at the port.
Yeah. Big shift in career later in life.
Yeah, look, it was. But he was one of those people who was always up for a challenge, as I suppose is sort of part of the Kelley DNA.
So it sounds like you've inherited that.
And I must say, the other person who was a great business person was Mum. You know, she built a really successful real estate agency business in the Bay and was very well regarded there and then retired probably about 20 odd years ago.
Yeah. So you said you're studying law?
Yep.
And then from law, you went into the consulting world?
No, actually, I did a master's at the London School of Economics, Paul. So I actually went over to London, and there was a joke at the time that LSE stood for Let's See Europe. So I had to sort of convince my parents that wasn't the case. Yeah. And I studied pretty hard, to be honest. So I did okay in that, and then moved to being a management consultant. Yeah.
Yep. So not just any firm though, you were one of the top firms.
Yeah, Booz Allen Hamilton, which was fantastic. You know, they had a scholarship program where you worked for them for 3 years, and then you were able to go to a US business school with everything paid. So I was lucky enough to get one of those scholarships at the end of my 3 years, and then rounded off my education at Harvard Business School with an MBA.
Nice. So then what happened? Did you come back to Adelaide?
No, I actually moved to Booz Allen in London initially, and the deal was that you had to work for them for 3 years. So I said, right, if I'm going to do this, I'll sort of, will take advantage of global clients. So I had some fantastic global clients. National Australia Bank had just bought a bunch of assets in the UK, including Yorkshire Bank. So I worked on the strategy assignments there, and then I came back to Singapore. And worked for Shell as my major client, and did that. Those were my two key ones. There were other clients in there, but and then moved into private equity in 2000.
Back in Australia?
No, again, I was actually in Asia again. So I was about 20 years in Asia, and then I spent about 10 across the UK and the US. But I was lucky enough to be hired by Colony Capital, where I met my great mentor, Tom Barrack, who was a huge influence on me and had 8 fantastic years at Colony, and then stayed in the private equity game really for the better part of about 20 years.
Yeah. So the reason I ask about you working overseas and being a South Australian working overseas, I can remember my Scottish grandmother saying, "Don't ask poor people how to make money." And she was a big fan of Get Out of Here, being Get Out of Here, South Australia.
Yeah.
And that wasn't an indictment on South Australia. It was just that there is more to the world to see out there, to learn being a South Australian. But hopefully, I think her hope was, and it worked, that I would come back one day. But your stay, was yours intentionally that long, or did it just roll that way?
It rolled that way. It was all sort of serendipitous. I mean, I love Adelaide. I always have. I always knew I'd come home. I just didn't know when. But I've always valued the culture here. There's a decency to South Australians. It's one of the few cities in the world where, if you go to a dinner party, people don't immediately talk about money. They talk about your kids, or they talk about the 36ers, or they talk about the footy, whatever it is. It's a very, I would say, a diverse and rich society, and it's quite unique physically.
Mm-hmm.
It really is true that you have the best beaches, the best wineries. I mean, the very best, I think, in many, many walks of life. And so as you travel, you realize actually, that old story, you don't know what you've got till it's gone.
Yeah.
The beauty of South Australia.
Yeah. We've just come back from 5 weeks in Europe, and it is one of the, apart from swimming in the Adriatic, which is just spectacular, there's something, as you say, about appreciating what we have in Adelaide and South Australia.
Yeah.
But you do have to get out of here. It can be pretty small-minded as well, can't it?
I agree. It can be, but it's sort of the flip side of the coin of that closeness that we all feel to one another. I mean, you always feel in Adelaide that any person's one phone call away, maybe 2 phone calls away.
Yeah.
But probably the penalty to that is occasionally it can be when you're a young person claustrophobic. I left when I was 22. I had 30 great years overseas, but I couldn't have been happier to come home.
Yeah. So tell me about the decision to come home. What happened after 30 years away? You've been away longer than you'd been here.
Yeah. Well, the secret, Paul, is I met a girl, and she was an Adelaide girl, and she had a fantastic son who she wanted to get educated. She was a single mum, Kirsty, when I met her, and we're now engaged, which is fantastic. But after about 11 years of her putting up with me. So, darling, if you're listening, thank you. But the reality was that it was actually something that personal, as opposed to a commercial decision, that really was the trigger.
Yeah. Has it come with any commercial compromises, do you think, or have you been able to navigate that?
I've been able to navigate. I mean, I think one of the things that we did as both a couple, and then obviously with my private company Holdfast, is from about 2011 we started buying into companies here and assets here. So we sort of had a fairly quick run up to coming home. I was already coming back probably once a month at least, and I was starting to reacquaint myself with the business community here. Mm-hmm. So it was actually, we really hit the ground running in 2018.
Yeah. Did you find that having been away for a long time, having been really commercial, and then coming back into Adelaide, that gave you a particular edge that perhaps wasn't there?
It did, but it was actually not always the best thing. I'd probably become very Americanized. I've been CEO of 2 US private equity firms for Asia Pacific, and there was a penalty, probably culturally to me as an Australian, not a penalty, but if you will, kind of a change of emphasis, which actually meant that I perhaps forgotten Australian idiom and also Australian cultural understandings. Like, for example, the way you handle a problem in business in Australia has to be collaborative. The American style is to be far more top down. I think in the early days, it would be a fair criticism to say that I hadn't yet made that transition fully home. I was here physically, but mentally and culturally, and how I was perhaps taking up my role, I hadn't fully reacclimatized.
Yeah. There's a lot to be said for that. It would be easy to gloss over that. And if you're not from South Australia, it'll be easy to gloss over it. But at the beginning of this conversation, Grant talked about the civility of living here. Yeah. And in a world at the moment that is polarizing around, and, heaven forbid in the US, you've got a generation of kids learning that the president can speak the way he speaks about people. It's a bit concerning. And so this notion of civility in the way that we speak to each other, in the way that we do business, I think our similarity with Canadians is no more evident at the moment than in a world that's polarizing, and that civility that, say, Mark Carney's using. But it's in our nature, isn't it? Particularly South Australians to not be abusive in the same way that the world seems to be doing at the moment.
Right, and that is a wonderful thing commercially, because actually, you can have a conversation with pretty much anybody in Adelaide, no matter what their level, because they will be decent.
Yeah,
they'll give you a shot. It's a very forgiving city. It throws its arms around people that are struggling. It's frankly an incredible place. I mean, I think we're going to experience tremendous growth here, but I hope a penalty of that is not that we lose that civility that's so quintessentially South Australian.
It's a funny thing, though, as South Australians as well, and you're involved in sport and well known and regarded in and around South Australian sport, that we punch above our weight on a national basis. But it gives us we've got a bit of a chip on our shoulder a little bit, don't we? We talk about that.
I mean, I think that grand final series against Sydney and just the drama that followed that series and was evident throughout the series, in fact, was an example of that chippy mentality that we have. But we do punch above our weight. I mean, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and we would expect to win state games of football. Yeah. We would expect sort of every other year to be in the grand final in basketball and to win, every 2 or 3 years. Netball was extraordinary in that era. Yeah. The Lightning were extraordinary. So and what I like about the current vibe in South Australia is we've rediscovered that. Our teams are doing well again.
Yeah.
And that just lifts the whole place. Everyone feels emotionally connected to their sports stars in Adelaide and South Australia in a way that they don't in Sydney, for sure, and to a certain degree in Melbourne.
Yep.
But here, you see them on, at the local delicatessen or supermarket. There's a style of operating in South Australia which enables us to feel very connected to sport.
Yep. Irrespective of your political views, there's a lot to be said at the moment for South Australia refinding sport and joining it with the arts to find our style and our place, isn't it? Where we don't have the money that Sydney has, we don't have the population that Victoria has, but we're becoming more comfortable in our own skin. Just in the last 5 years, is that just my perception of it, or do you think that's real?
No, I think it's entirely true. I mean, I think one of the great things that's happened in the last 5 years is frankly the entrenching of our identity.
Yeah.
Events matter to identity. So does sporting success. So does the power of educational institutions, and all of these things collectively mean there's now confidence where there wasn't. I'm old enough to remember the State Bank, and I think everyone who lived through that period remembers that we went from being, in the conversation with the other major cities, third largest capital city, right? And we sort of lost that with the economic travails that came with the State Bank losses. So I think it's our coming out party after 30 years of frankly pretty tough slog.
Yep. Yeah. It was interesting, a lot of the conversations I had with senior government people over the last 30 years of in my leadership role at SYC was where so many conversations started with, we can't afford or we don't have money for that. And my annoyed answer all the time was, forever will it be when you start conversations like that. Yeah. No successful person starts with the money.
Exactly.
It starts with value. It starts with the idea. It starts with how you create value. And money will flow one way or another if you get the value right.
Yes.
But we had this thing for so long in South Australia around how much money we did or didn't have, which is understandable because of the state bank and all of that sort of stuff. But hopefully that funk is over and we're starting to get out of it. In my 25 years as a CEO, one of the hardest things to find was a consulting and advisory firm where they'd actually been CEOs. I created CEO Advantage to be the advisory firm I was looking for. Go to ceoadvantage.com.au and find out how we can help you and your team be the best in the business.
I think so. I mean, I think, Paul, you've highlighted a very key equation or part of the equation there, which is access to capital. I think we've now got substantial wealth once again in South Australia. Many of the, much of the wealth, I should say, in the last 30 years was created by families, which, and we can tick off who those families are, but they're all, I think, reasonably philanthropic and invested in the state, and hopefully in our small way, we are as well. And I think what's actually happened as a consequence of that success, and also of the accumulation of capital for investment in business, whether it's through homegrown private equity funds like Holdfast, or whether it's through the banks having perhaps a little more confidence in the state economy, there doesn't seem to be a lack of capital. There was a lack of capital in the 90s. So a lot of this, I think, again, is an overhang of that trauma where, if you can't find a banker that wants to back your business and you've got to basically pull your kids out of school to fund whatever business you're in, that is very demoralizing. Now we have the ability to grow our businesses and have those other things as well.
Yeah. We've got a strong and growing defence industry. I think we can do so much more with. We've got, we're a safe place. We're environmentally, we're easy to get to, all those things. One of the criticisms of Adelaide, though, is that, one of the good things was, I think, Lot 14, and we've got a really entrepreneurial base. When I moved to Sydney in my 20s, it was one of the things that I noticed was because we didn't have capital, we knew how to scramble. Like, we worked harder than just about anybody, and a dollar that a Sydney person wouldn't pick up, we were like, we were after it.
But I mean, necessity is the mother of invention, as we know, and it's such an interesting parallel to the 36ers, your Sydney story, because we have about 6% of the addressable sporting economy that Melbourne has. Now, there's a lot more competition in Melbourne than there is in Adelaide, but what it means is that we have to be driving so much value for our sponsors, for our fans. We have to engage them. We have to make sure that if they call at 10 o'clock at night, we answer, and that when we answer, we're on. And if they need something, we deliver it. You don't do that when you're in a successful large market. If you do, you're probably one of the rarities. And so I think South Australians, this is why they also globalise well, is that they have had to be better. And it's something that gets lost. I think it's now being rediscovered. And it's probably the effect, to a certain degree, of producing a premier of the quality of Peter Malinauskas. And people can't actually understand how Adelaide has this best and brightest type of culture that we do in every industry, but Peter being a standout. And similarly, when we've with the 36ers been doing as well as we have, there is shock in the eastern states. So we've got to, I think, be even more confident and have a little bit of swagger, because if we don't do that, we won't get our fair share of the spoils.
The experience that, as somebody running a business myself, the 36ers, and I've got to say, we're, as you know, we're big Crows fans and Crows supporters, and sponsor Jordan Dawson, the captain, and so we love it. But our experience of what the 36ers, your 36ers machine is doing, if I can call it that, is taking a South Australian approach. It's really personal. Your staff take the time to know who's in and around the club and and speak to them, and the events you're organising, the community that you started building or kept building is becoming more personalised, and in a big city, I want to imagine it's really hard to do that, but here, that's its key, isn't it? And you've done such an amazing job. Is it true that you've got more members here than any of the other clubs?
We do, yeah. We've got about 8,500 members, and we're number one in the NBL for social media. So we've got just over 400,000, maybe it's closer to 500 now, social media followers across various platforms. But the real thing is the mindset, right? Like it starts with, as you know, our family stand on Port Road and greet every fan we can find, hopefully by name. In many cases, we know, the person, and we remember their kids' birthdays, remember their pet's name, and we remember what they enjoyed for a drink. We've done something that I think, with respect, the footy clubs haven't done. It's easier in basketball because it's indoors and it's a controlled environment and the crowds are smaller. But we've had to really lift ourselves up by our bootstraps, and it wasn't an easy journey. And so it required reimagining what the value proposition was to the customer, and what the value proposition is to businesses more generally, or more specifically, because that's a really important part of our equation.
How has basketball in Australia come back? Because it was so big in the 90s, and then it seemed to drift for a while, and now it's back. It's coming back. It's not. I don't think it's all the way.
No, it's not all the way
back.
No.
And you and the 36 have been a big part of doing that.
Thank you.
What brought you into it in the first place? Who buys a sporting club that's not? I mean, it wasn't where it is now.
Yeah.
So you had a vision for doing it, or a moment of madness. But what happened that you bought the 36s?
I mean, the politically correct answer is that we saw a huge opportunity, and probably that we had actually been. That myself and Kirsty had spent so much time overseas that we'd seen the success of big sport. Paul, the real reason is there were two 36ers who kept me out of the starting five at Pulteney Grammar. And so this is sort of the revenge of the nerds. To Andy Simons and Peter Sexton, they're both good friends and great guys, but and they were wonderful 36ers. But, for me, it was a passion. It started off really as a passion project, and then it evolved into really understanding the business and trying to figure out the drivers of success.
Yeah. So you've got private equity, you invest in sport.
Yep.
You're back in South Australia as a passionate South Australian.
Right.
What's your vision for 5 years from now, and the role you're playing in South Australia, and how that can have an influence on us here?
Yeah, I mean, we want to keep growing our business organically. We don't set targets in terms of total assets under management. I mean, right now we've got about 100 million under management, which is not, mine necessarily. It's for a lot of people that we manage funds for. Yep. But the key thing, actually, I think, is to keep your eye on quality. So for us, there's not an absolute target of AUM. A lot of companies, by the way, if you gave them a truth serum, do target being big. And maybe big is beautiful, but our economic model is to do the best thing, even if it means that we grow a little more slowly. I'd rather look my investors in the eye and say, we've done really well by you on this particular deal. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, I put 10% of my own money against the investors in every deal we do. So that actually, with the 36ers, we own 100%, but on the property deals, et cetera, we put a lot of skin in the game.
Yeah. Let's pivot for a second. No successful South Australian doesn't love their wine as well, and you've got a foray into wine. Tell us
Thank
about
you.
that.
We have a small vineyard in Port Wollonga that makes a cracking Grenache.
It is.
And I hope, I think you've tried it, haven't you?
Yeah,
and
we have.
and
Love it.
look, that's been a labour of love. But that was actually our first investment back in Adelaide in 2011. Was to buy this vineyard and the house with it, which we've loved every minute of.
Isn't that how you make a small fortune? You take a large fortune to buy a vineyard or a boat?
Well, I have to say, so we sell our grapes most years to Hardy's, and we get a pretty good price from Hardy's for that. And then we usually have 1 or 2 tons left over after we've fulfilled our commitment to them. So we're small batch and we don't market it commercially. We actually, usually give it to mates.
Yeah.
And hopefully they enjoy it like you have.
Yeah, we love it.
Thank you.
So coming back to your vision for South Australia, let's say your vision isn't to set a numerical target, but you talk always, every time I've spoken to you and you read about you talk about creating value and adding value to community, but adding value to investors and investing alongside of them. So 5 years from now, what are the sort of things that you think are the growth opportunities for our state?
Look, I think you've nailed a couple of them already. Defence is obviously a huge opportunity. So is education. So is the digital economy with Lot 14. For us, we've got 3 essentially businesses. We've got the sporting, investments, property, and agriculture, because they're industries that to varying degrees, I and my family have a background in. So what we would like to do is keep recruiting the best people and keep finding ways to get to the best product. I think with the 36ers, we're not completely there, but we are very, very close. And we've had an incredible team that's led by a great executive, Nick Barbato. I think we can do much more in agriculture at Holdfast. And I think the property fund is now up and running and will continue to grow. On the ag side, we've actually that business has been very large previously. We did own one of the largest sheep stations for about 5 years and then sold out of that in 2020. But that taught me, A, how tough agriculture is, but B, there's also opportunity if you're prepared to be innovative and work hard.
The world seems to be becoming more easily aggravated by each other, even
right
internally. I think the outbreak of a lot of this sort of one nation style talk. Is there a pathway through this polarizing period that we're in without descending into chaos, do you think?
I sincerely hope so. I mean, I think what's changed the equation a lot, in the last 20 years has been social media. So I think we tend to dramatize conflict. The media love clickbait.
Yeah.
In every walk of life. And that business model won't go away. But what we need to do is actually figure out what unites us, not what separates us. I know it's a cliche, but the truth is there is a sensible center in this country. Whoever captures that wins political office. And whoever wins political office in Australia, does obviously drive change if change is required. So I think the first step, though, is to reacquaint ourselves with the center, the sensible center. And it starts with the individual. The truth is that if you can avoid raising your voice, or if you can avoid taking an adverse view before you've listened to somebody that you may not ordinarily think aligns with your views, that's where it starts. It starts with us as individuals. I actually have very strong views on this because I've seen us descend as a nation, and it's been a global trend, into, extraordinary anger and frankly, unkindness. The social media commentary on the 36ers, if you believed it, you would, I wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. So you've got to develop a thick skin if you're a leader now. And you've also got to maintain, I think, an old-fashioned set of principles around civility, courtesy, and listening to the other side.
I think that the what you are touching on there as well, and you use the word kindness. I use the word kindness a lot as well, because I think that where kindness was once seen as a form of weakness, I think it's a point of competitive advantage now where
Yeah.
it's not naive polyamory kindness of
No.
letting people walk over you, but at the same time, it's not falling into shouting, swearing, and name calling.
Right.
That strong kindness
Yes.
takes some
Yeah.
intellect and some value programming,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I mean, without getting religious, it's what you might call muscular Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
It's the sense of you're strong, but you're actually principled, and that you stand for something beyond making money, and you stand for something, frankly, beyond winning.
Mm-hmm.
Winning without values is a hollow feeling. It's almost soul destroying more so than losing with honor. So there's no upside to constantly winning. I think if you have any form of human decency, you've got to take people with you, and you've got to believe that your journey is their journey, that they actually share in the success. If you have that mindset, life is pretty easy. If you don't have that mindset, you have the situation that we do have currently in many parts of the world where there's just seems to be, complete conflict constantly. But it's interesting, in life and in history, when all appears lost, that's often when you find the pathway, because you've got to get to that point to actually have clarity.
It's a beautiful description. I think this idea that winning with dignity, winning with values is rarely talked about, but it's absolutely important to think about the construct of winning poorly. The idea of winning poorly where if you win, you've created a loser. And if you've beaten 10 opponents, you've created 10 losers.
Yes.
Is not additive to the world.
And, I'll give you an example where it has evolved in a positive fashion. I remember the footy of the 80s, which was, basically sort of, almost like warfare.
I was about to say brutal.
Wasn't it?
Yeah.
I love it that when at the end of a footy game, whether it's the Power or the Crows, you see the guys shaking hands.
Yeah.
That's really good. And it's a great role. It's great role modeling for younger people to see that, okay, the battle's over, now we shake hands. In old parlance, we go and have a beer, whatever it is, but we actually don't sort of exaggerate the sporting encounter. I think, again, role modeling for young people, how are they going to learn to act with dignity in class if we don't act as good role models? So that at the 36ers, we are really strong on the guys actually ensuring that they comport themselves really well, especially when there's kids around.
Yeah.
To me, that's a very important element of our culture.
Yeah. Let's flip that and go to possibly the potential harms of participation culture where everybody wins a prize.
That's right.
Which is just not realistic either.
No.
How do we bring back this idea that being competitive is not a bad thing if it's regulated, if you regulate yourself properly, winning with dignity, losing with dignity, all of those sort of things. How do we build resilience in our young people while still having that dignity that you just talked about?
I think this is something every parent struggles with, is in an uncertain world, in a world where kids these days have, frankly, Paul, far more challenges than you and I faced.
Yeah.
And they have constant almost market evaluation through social media. So you have to love your kids first and foremost, but at the same time, injecting an element of accountability, responsibility is crucial.
Mm-hmm.
I think it comes back to being a good role model. It's really hard to actually tell 15-year-old or 22-year-old in my case, what the right thing to do is. But if you set the example, and I have to say I'm very proud of both my son and my stepson, but if you set the example, they then can follow that. And I think without that, it's very hard to conceptualize what to do. Whenever I think of a particular situation that I'm in, I think back to my mentors, and I almost have a mental image of how they dressed, how they acted, how they stood. And this is me being an older guy myself, but I still think about those key role models and how they set the tone for me, just by being themselves, just by being people I admired.
How you've talked about mentors. I swear by having mentors throughout my professional career. How important would you say to your sons, for example, is it to find a mentor? And how do you do they just come? Do you find them? Do you seek them out? Do they see this mysterious mentor relationship? How does that come about?
Well, about 10 or probably 15 years ago, Jack said to me, I've got 2 role models. I said, who are they, Jack? He goes, Lionel Messi and you.
Nice.
And we still joke about it. Look, mentorships, it's a great question, because if kids don't get an opportunity to be mentored, that's when they struggle, right? So I'd almost say you've got to reach out. Like I stopped in a car park the other day and chatted to a young guy after a talk I'd given over a breakfast. And this young fellow texted me, and we're in touch because he wants some advice on his career. It's another hour out of the day, but it might be a crucial hour for him.
Yeah.
Perhaps, with respect, more important than it is to me. When I'm sipping my coffee and I'm on the cell phone talking to this young guy. So you have to enlarge your energy pie, and just take it on. And I would argue that if you do that, you will get energy back.
Yeah.
I'm a huge believer that in life there actually is karma, and that you'll actually be enriched if you enrich others, right?
Yeah. So
I always tell people, make that effort to reach out, and you'll actually get more in return than you ever dreamt of.
Yeah, I agree. It's almost an embarrassment of riches, isn't it? When you're trying to give help, and then you're learning, or you finish giving a young person advice, and then you think, I better just go and tidy my own house, because the advice I just gave, I haven't been listening to myself.
And they give you certainly the illusion, but maybe the reality of being young again.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a gift that is irreplaceable.
Yeah. Fabulous conversation as always, mate. I have one last question I ask everybody, and it shouldn't be challenging, but lots of people find this challenging. Imagine it's one of those days. It's had a bad day, one thing after the other. You're driving home, you're in a bad mood, but a song comes on the radio. Even if you want to stay in the bad mood, this song is just going to put you out of it. What's your song?
I mean, there's probably a couple of Foo Fighters songs, so I'd date myself with that. But I think, the classic "Learn to Fly," that just pumps you up, right?
Yeah.
That to me is always my favorite. But funnily enough, it depends what mood you're in. The Red Hot Chili Peppers can really, just hit it perfectly.
Yeah.
But it's a little more moody. But I'd say definitely the Foo Fighters with several of their tracks, and that being the key one.
Yeah, anything that's got Dave Grohl on that, Dave Grohl energy.
How good is he, right?
Got to be happy.
But probably there's a lot of people watching this thing, look at these 2 old guys.
Yeah.
Like the Foo Fighters are passe. I mean, Learn to Fly, I reckon, was recorded in the year 2000 or thereabouts. It was definitely the early 2000s. And you sort of
had the awesome film clip with it that went 100%, with it too, right?
But the other track I've got to say that I love used to be, and this will really date me, and you may not even remember it, but do you remember Dreams by Van Halen?
Yeah.
I mean, and it was one of Sammy Hagar's first ever songs, and the guitar riffs in that, and just and again the vision of the US acrobatic team and the US Air Force.
At the time, it was groundbreaking.
It was powerful, wasn't it?
Yeah, fantastic.
But we probably look like a couple of old fellas reminiscing about a bygone era here, Paul.
We do. Grant Kelley, thank you so much for joining us on the CEO Advantage podcast.
Thank you, mate. Appreciate it.